Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Well, hello and welcome everyone. And this is Sinikka Waugh with Your Clear Next Step. And we're here on the Even Better podcast, part of our ongoing commitment to help make sure that we can have better work days so that together we can co-create better communities. And I am delighted, absolutely delighted to be here with my friend Faye Howard. Faye, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who haven't met Faye, you will. I am so delighted with the opportunity to be spending more time with Faye and getting to know her more over these last few years. Faye is currently a marketing support specialist at Pella Corporation, where one of the things that she does is just really make sure that Pella brand is represented consistently and accurately across retail, trade, and commercial business segments. So in addition to that, she's got a master's degree in training and development. So you can see already why Faye and I wound up in conversations. She's held multiple roles in training and curriculum design and customer service and marketing throughout her career. She is a native of Minnesota, but has moved south, made her way home in Pella, one of my favorite towns in the world, go Dutch, with her husband, Seth, and their 3 boys. So here's what I know about Faye. I know that Faye lights up a room with her smile. I know that she connects with others and is really, really intentional about bringing positive influence to those around her. I have not watched this yet, but because I'm in Indianola, not in Pella, but I know that we can find her in the stands cheering on her boys in their various activities and likely their friends and colleagues and her neighbors as well. I know that we've got a shared fondness for a good cup of coffee and good friendship and good books. So looking forward to this conversation with Faye. Faye, you are talking with us today about 4 things you might not realize about your influence. So give us a little bit of background on this. How did this topic come to be interesting to you? Why is influence so cool and so important to you?
Sure. So I just really think that everyone longs to have a purpose and we want to know that our lives count. And one of the ways that we can do that is we can just make a difference wherever we're at in our lives. And I just think being intentional about making someone's day a little bit better or a little bit more positive is something that doesn't just happen naturally, but when it does, it's pretty incredible.
It is. Well, so now that's interesting to me. You say it doesn't happen naturally. So that might help us get into this topic a little bit because you make it seem so effortless. You make it seem so natural to lighten others' spirits and to lift them up and to influence that with that positive bit of sunshine in the day. But you're saying that there's intention here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think once you find what motivates you, I think you'll find it just comes really easy and that we all have different gifts. And we'll get into that a little bit, but we have different gifts and we need to celebrate those gifts. And once we realize what those gifts are, we can open them and we can share them with others, knowing that other people are just going to be better as a result of that. And ultimately, influence comes down to us planting the seeds, right? So we get to plant the seeds, but because we're using the gifts that we've been given by God, He's going to grow that. He's going to grow that influence. So we get the privilege of planting the seeds, and we may or may not see the full impact, but at least we can get a glimpse into the impact we're having.
Okay, so let's get right to it then. 4 things you might not realize about your influence. So the first one, and I just want to bask in this one. I just want to hang out in this one. Imperfect, ordinary people like us have influence. Oh, that is a breath of fresh air. Faye, talk us through that.
Yes, absolutely. So the thing that I'm encouraged by is that we do not have to be like in a certain stage of life. We don't have to have a lot of money, a fancy degree, or an impressive following on social media to have influence, right? He uses ordinary people that have imperfections and inconsistencies, and believe me, I have plenty of those, right? To just really impact other people. And our influence isn't really about if we're qualified, if we feel we're qualified or adequate. It's really just about God using us and our experiences and being courageous to share those experiences to leave an impact on people that we encounter in our lives. So what the metaphor that I like to use, it's basically a ripple effect, right? So we've all probably been there skipping rocks or throwing rocks in a pond or a creek or a lake at some point in our life. And you just think about that, even just a small pebble can make a huge ripple. And knowing that that small pebble can make such a big difference, I want that difference to be positive as I go through. And I don't get it right 100% of the time, believe you me. But again, just dropping that pebble can provide such an awesome ripple effect, even with our imperfections and even just ordinary people.
Oh, that's really lovely. So I have to share this story because there, just as you described the ripple effect, it reminded me of a time that we were traveling with our children, and Sophie, the younger one, must have been 5 at the time. And we had just stopped at a gas station. It had been a rainy day, but the rain had stopped. And so we're in the parking lot of a gas station. And I look over at her and she's got her water bottle and she's tipping it and she's pouring it into the puddle. So, Sophie, what are you doing? Right? It's raining outside. You're pouring your water. That's for you drinking. What are you doing pouring your water in the puddle? And she said, well, I just wanted to help the puddle get bigger. And there's something there, right? There's something there about sharing your influence, right? If you're thinking about that ripple and you're contributing positivity and you're contributing greatness to help someone be even better, right? Aren't you just
Yes.
pouring a little water into the puddle, making the puddle bigger?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great analogy too, is when we are full ourselves and driven by our gifts and our passions and things like that, we can use that overflow to help influence people in a positive way. And again, you think small pebble in a big pond, you have no idea what kind of waves that small pebble could make as it ripples out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so 4 things
Yeah.
you might not realize. One is that anybody, imperfect, ordinary people like us have influence and we can make that positive. So you've got a second point here, and your second point is that our gifts and passions translate into influence. Now talk to us about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were all created with special and unique gifts to share, whether you realize it or not. Some of you may have discovered what those gifts are already, but some of you may have not, or you're still kind of wandering and searching. But really, once we've discovered those, they are for the benefit of others. And we need to unwrap them and put them to use rather than keeping them to ourselves. We're coming out of the holiday season. Seems like forever ago, but it was only 2 months ago. And I look back at my boys opening their Christmas presents, and my youngest is a Lego fanatic. He loves Legos. And he didn't want to just let them stay in the box, right? It was a gift. He wanted to open it. He wanted to dig in, and he wanted to get to work on those Legos. And so I think our gifts are just like that. Sometimes, we might doubt ourselves or wonder if this is the gift that we really should be sharing, but that's not how we're wired. We're wired to open those gifts and to use them. And I've had people ask me, so how do I find out what are my gifts and passions? What do I do? So, I mean, you and I know, just being in our profession, there's lots of different inventories that you can definitely take, professional inventories, but I just like to look at it too about, what energizes you. So what doesn't seem hard to do, for example? What may seem easy for you might seem hard for somebody else, and that's where you could potentially have influence. Also, using experiences, things that might have influenced you along the way, or what are those areas that you care deeply about or find worthwhile, and really use those to positively impact other people. A great example is a coworker of mine found out she was having a baby and he was going to be born with Down syndrome. And of course, there's some fear that goes along with that. But our community, they found out, and there was another family that had a daughter who's now in college that has Down syndrome, and they have just been able to connect and share the highs and share the lows. And I just think about the influence that family, that older family that has walked ahead of my coworker as a younger family, have gone through. And again, it was just something that they have experienced and were able to share their experience so they can positively influence. Sometimes though, we run into the trap of comparing our gifts and passions. So if only I had this, or if only I could do this, or oh, I wish I could do this. I mean, I fall into this comparison game on occasions. But really, it's our responsibility to use the gifts and the talents that we've really been given to influence others now and in the years to come. And when we can embrace what we've been given rather than trying to fit somewhere else, that allows us to just really celebrate the gifts that other people have and just admire them. So I think recognizing that other people have wonderful gifts. Yes, maybe I wish I could be a great singer, or yes, I wish I was maybe called to serve on the front lines at places, but I haven't been. But I can recognize those giftings in other people and then figure out how can I apply that to my life so then I can ultimately influence. I mean, we weren't made to cram into somebody else's mold, right? We're able to find out what our giftings are. So, kind of jumping ahead, but one of the gifts that I have just discovered about myself is, and you had alluded to this earlier, is encouragement. I love it. It comes easy to me. And I'm often prompted by the Holy Spirit. Sometimes a name will just come to mind or something, to send a text or to make a phone call to someone. And I've been prompted to make space in my day, maybe to have lunch with somebody or to reach out and say, hey, are you available for a walk? Or do you want to grab coffee or something? Just to learn about what's happening in their lives and to know that, hey, we're in community together. We don't have to do this alone. And for some people, that's a little scary. But for me, I can just fall naturally into it. And so I try and utilize that gift as much as possible.
That's awesome. So as you were describing that, your statement there, our gifts and passions translate into influence. And what I heard are a couple of things. One of them was the reality that it's like our passion, that desire to share, like you were sharing with your son, and the playing with the Legos, right? Get right in and share that gift if you're passionate about it. But there are a lot of us that wind up comparing. We wind up maybe holding back sometimes because, well, I don't do this as well as that person. And I know I've been spending some time in women's ministry lately, and I know there are fears in that space in particular about, well, my story isn't as grandiose as someone else's story, or I haven't been in that spot, or I don't, I'm not like that person. Maybe I can't help at all. And I think what you're reminding us is that we were each given a certain set of gifts, and it's not up to us to say, well, I wish I had so-and-so's gifts. It's up to us to say, well, these are what I have. What good can I do with these? Is that a fair way to put that?
Absolutely. This is what I have to bring to the table, and I'm gonna go all in. And honestly, I think doing something, maybe is it sharing an experience, maybe is it serving someone, whatever that might be, doing something is going to have a greater impact and influence than doing nothing at all. So, and again, we're not necessarily in charge of it, right? Again, we're simply planting the seeds.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I heard once, as you shared the story about the folks with the children with Down syndrome,
Yeah.
I heard a story about mentoring, or an analogy about mentoring once, that created this word picture that what is a mentor? A mentor is someone, they're not necessarily have it all figured out. They haven't been there, done all of that for us, but they have been on that step that we're on. So you picture someone coming up out of a dark basement, for example, or they're climbing a dark set of stairs. And the mentor is the one who has the ability to shed light on the very next step. And sometimes when we're influencing someone, maybe I can't tell you where your journey is going to go, but I can tell you that I've been in that spot where you are right there. I've been on that step, and I know it squeaks, and I know it's uncomfortable. And here, let me light that one step for you.
Yes, that's a great analogy, because influencing it, you make a good point about the dark step, right? Not all of our experiences are good. Not all of our experiences are fun. Yes, those are the things we love to step into and to help, but I have had several dear friends lose their fathers over the last couple of months. And I lost my dad about 8.5 years ago to cancer. And so I can walk along with them and hopefully create space for them to share their story along that way. And so again, connecting with others, that's a gift of mine. And so how can I connect with those daughters that might be feeling a similar experience that I walked through? So even if it's not such a great story or not such a great experience, I think at least having hope that people can get through or shining light on that next step, I think is a great analogy.
Yeah. So we are here with Faye Howard, and we are talking about 4 things you might not realize about your influence. So the first one is really hope inspiring for all of us, that imperfect, ordinary people like us have influence. And the second one is that our gifts and passions translate into influence. So let's move on to the third one. And the third point you shared with me in advance is that influence doesn't just happen. We need to be intentional. I think I've seen you do this in your life, but I think you better share with us some more examples of, like, what does that mean? How do we do that?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of equations that I like to think about is intentions minus actions equals squat, right? So you could have every good intention of doing something, yeah, like I really need to get off the couch and maybe go for a walk, or I really should call X, Y, and Z, right? But if I don't do anything about it, nothing's going to happen, right? The inverse is also true, though. Intentions plus actions equals our character, or ultimately our influence. So, really, our intentions are our mindset, right? So, it's a way that we think about the world and how those thoughts impact our actions and our choices. So, we need to, especially if we want to be intentional about our influence, we need to develop our mindset carefully, because our influence results from making those deliberate, determined, and repeated choices. And that can go both ways. They can be good choices or they can be bad choices. So we probably know several people that maybe have good intentions but made bad choices, and that impacted what kind of influence that they have. So I think it's important to know, though, that it's not about checking off a box, or it's not about I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to do this, but it's really centering yourself on where's my heart, and helping find the best mindset is going to be critical for our lives and our influence. So where is the heart? And so for me, as a believer, I like to take a look at the character of God and just really find out what is his character and the truth that is in his word, and how do I develop my mindset around that, which will then influence the choices that I make. So, how do I know about the character? Well, it's getting into his manual. It's getting into his Bible. So unlike our spouses and our kids who don't come with manuals, um, God does. And so we can learn about his character. And for me, it's not about being a theologian. It's not about going very, very, very deep, but it is getting to know his character and who he is. So, four mindsets that I like to consider or prioritize are really to just love like Jesus. I've really been trying hard to love rather than judge, right? So we have been given love not only from our Heavenly Father, but from people surrounding us, family, friends, and we're privileged to just give that away. So how do we give love? You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but serving others. And that's really just showing up, but not necessarily for recognition to say, oh, hey, I'm here, but to show up for other people. So a couple of ways that I do this, and again, this is just me because these are my giftings, is I'm at the grocery store a lot with three growing boys in my house. So if I know someone that is in need, that maybe needs a meal, I'll just say, hey, I'm going to pick up some extra groceries. When can I bring over supper for you? Right? It doesn't have to be fancy. Chances are the salad is going to be bagged. Chances are dessert is going to be pre-made from the bakery, and it's going to be fine. But I can just show up. And I had a dear friend bring me a meal just the other day when we were experiencing some things in our family, and it was such a blessing. So again, it could be just showing up for a friend. So we may have somebody that, they need help watching their kids. You might be in a stage where you have some time and some resources to say, hey, yeah, let me take your kids for a while. Let me just have a breather. It also just might be showing up for some sort of an event. Maybe they need some behind the scenes volunteers and you're interested in that event. So I just think showing up for others, but again, not for your recognition or because you have to, but because it's something that you want to do. We alluded to this a little earlier, was encouraging through words. So a way that we could do this is to use our words to build up rather than to tear down. Words of affirmation is one of my love languages. And so this is really easy for me, but for some people, it can be really hard. So stopping to pause before you think about what you're going to say. Is this going to build somebody up, or is this going to tear somebody down? Because what I've learned is that our tongue is tiny, but it is mighty, and it can influence people in an awesome way, and it can influence people in a very hurtful way. And then finally is just really living with eternity in mind. So investing our earthly treasures into eternal things that are going to reap eternal awards. So one thing that I've learned is that my gifting isn't to serve on the front lines in the mission field. I have not been called to go to Haiti or to Africa or somewhere, but I have learned that generosity is one of the gifts that has been instilled into me throughout generations. And so we've been blessed by able to financially sponsor two children through Compassion International. And through our finances and our prayers and consistent communication with them, we're planting seeds, and hopefully we're impacting their eternity. So again, while I'm not called to be in the mission field, because God knows that just not a good spot for me. There are some other people with really great gifts that go and do that and can, live in harder conditions and things like that. But I can still use my earthly treasure into eternal impact.
You bet. Well, and in all of those examples, Faye, what I'm hearing is that consistent, I mean, it makes sense because we're in the bullet of being intentional, but it's that consistent thinking about it. Like, I think a lot of us believe that our character is just what happens or what shows up on a day-to-day basis, but it's intention plus doing it, right? There was that post a long time ago that said, 4 frogs are sitting on a log, one decides to jump off, how many are left? And the answer, you're like 4 minus 1. I feel like I can do that math, right? So 4 frogs sitting on a log, one decides to jump off. How many are left? You think the answer is 3, but it's not. And the answer is that they're all 4 still there, because intending to or deciding to and actually doing are 2 different things, right? And I think the examples that you're giving here are that we need to make it intentional and habitual as we think about that. Character doesn't just happen. It happens with habits and intentional habits and consistency there, right?
Exactly. I would agree. And I think that's a great analogy to use, because so many times we have good intentions, but again, we either question, are we going to do it right? Is it going to be relevant? Whatever that might be. But really, again, doing something is going to make more impact probably than doing nothing.
Doing nothing. Yeah. You bet.
Yeah.
I love that. So just showing up, to your point about just showing up. I think about how many times in my life I've been blessed by people just showing up. Sinikka, I thought of you today, and so I texted you because I thought, I don't know why, but I thought you needed a word of encouragement today. I hope it helps. And God knows and has those moments where that absolutely was what I needed that particular day.
Yes. And there have been moments where, I've heard see a need, fill a need, where maybe I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to show up, I'm going to do this. And maybe I've done that on my own will, because again, I know it's like, oh yeah, I should do this. It's the right thing to do. God's going to use that, but it's different than when he places something on your heart and says, hey, I want you to go do this. And when we're obedient to that, it's pretty incredible to see, like the ripple effect, if you will. And I'm sure you're blessed when you get those texts, right? And again, it doesn't have to be anything grandiose. It's something just very simple. But when you get that kind of feeling that, yes, this person is on my mind, how can I bless them, or how can I make an impact on them using what I've been given or the gifts that I have? And sometimes I think a fun way to kind of look at it is, you know what, I don't know if you need to hear this, but this is what I feel like I'm supposed to say to you. I don't know if it's supposed to mean anything. And you'd be surprised. Some people are like, yeah, no, that really didn't resonate. But some people might be like, you know what? You're the 3rd person to say that to me today. And that means something is confirmed or whatever it might be. So even if you have the prompt, you can kind of play dumb in a way and just say, you know what? I don't know if you need to hear this, but here's what's been placed on my heart. So those are just kind of some things that work for me, but we need to find ways that work for every individual.
Absolutely. But that's to that 3rd point about being intentional about it, not just when those prompts come to do something, to actually do it. Don't just sit there and maybe carve off, like you said, you carve off time on your calendar to lean into that space and to encourage.
Yes.
And
yeah. And my favorite example of mine too is, I'm a very corporate America, right? It's very quiet. Right now we're working at home, but I'm used to working in a cube, with professionals. And I had a prompting to go with my son a couple of years ago on a 6th grade mission trip. Talk about high energy. Okay. That's a lot of energy for a week. But God prompted me to go ahead and do that. And I was so blessed by that opportunity. And even if it took me out of my comfort zone, because sometimes being intentional is going to take you out of your comfort zone, right? But again, I love the words that you use that said leaning into that. It's going to result in some incredible things, not only probably for the recipient, but for you as well. When you can lean into things that maybe aren't super comfortable, but that there's a positive reward from them.
You bet. Well, that ties back to the whole theme here, which is things you might not realize about your influence. And that's going back to saying, but it's not about me, right? I'm leaning into this so that I can be a positive influence, so that I can contribute, so that I can, make someone else's day better.
Absolutely.
Nice. Okay, so let's get to the fourth point. These are 4 things you might not realize about your influence. Imperfect, ordinary people like us have it. Our gifts and passions translate into it. It doesn't just happen. We need to be intentional about it. And then your fourth point was we are not the master of our influence. What does that mean?
Yes. Yeah. So influence is really ultimately about honoring God. And that should just inspire us to take our potential and the gifts that we have to influence people in our homes, our workplaces, and our communities, and to take that seriously because we're going to interact with people every single day, and every interaction is an opportunity to be positive or to be not positive, if you will. And I think sometimes we get hung up on wondering, are we doing something right? Are we doing enough? And again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, but when it comes to our potential to influence, doing something has more impact than doing nothing. So I think if you want to increase your influence, again, my encouragement would be start doing something, but don't make it be something that you have to add to your to-do list, but rather something that aligns with your values, your gifts, things that you enjoy. I honestly don't mind whipping up a meal together for somebody and bringing it to them, right? That's fine. So again, what are those things that you value? You may love working and volunteering with pets, right? So maybe that's an area of influence that you can have. You may love just coaching people in a work environment or helping them tweak presentations, and maybe you're very detail oriented. So what kind of gifts do you have that you can share with other people? We talked a little bit about my gifts that I've learned over the years is just encouragement, and that my gifting isn't necessarily to serve on the front lines, but that generosity is, and to just being able to share the gifts that we've been given financially with some organizations that we care deeply about. Again, influence is really a work of the heart. It's not just checking off the box, and doing doesn't necessarily mean that there's a sign of influence there, right? Because that could be a sign of influence in itself. Like I'm constantly doing, but really am I doing for the right reasons? And I think, like we've said, go ahead.
Yeah, let me interrupt you here for a second because I'm wrestling with something. Just this is recent, and you're gonna laugh because this is a dumb example, but I think you can make heads or tails of this. So I'm passionate about a couple of different things going on in the Indianola community, and I participate in service work and those kinds of things. And I wound up in an email chain that I wasn't expecting to be in, and wound up then on a meeting that I wasn't expecting. So I'm pretty protective of my time. I run a business. I got a teenage daughter and a very busy husband. I try not to get into extra meetings if I can avoid it, but I wound up in a meeting very, very recently, and I'm looking around the Zoom room going, why am I here? Like, what am I contributing? What have I got here? And I'm listening, and there's a piece of data I have, but I'm not the only one with that piece of data. There's one other person on the call who has exactly the same data and the same reference points that I do. And so she can contribute the same piece of data. I'm like, okay, well, it's not for the data. It's not for my, my background in this knowledge. Why am I here? And then we get to this point where part of the conversation is that the next step is there's an application for a grant. And the next step is that someone's got to fill out the online form. And there's like crickets in the room. And I'm thinking, I can fill out online forms in my sleep, right? This is something that I do. It's like breathing. I can do it in and out, and it just doesn't even faze me. I'm like, sure, I can fill out and there was this expression of relief or this expression of gratitude because the contribution that I'm making, and I've received multiple emails today, very shortly after this meeting, which was just yesterday, saying, thank you so much for contributing. You are such an inspiration. And I'm like, for heaven's sakes, I'm typing 10 pieces of data in an electronic form. And I'm like, really? And I wonder how that ties to your point about we're not a master of our influence. Sometimes God will use us and our gifts in ways that maybe we weren't expecting, but that will still be positive, even if we don't see it in that second. Is that fair?
I would totally think that's fair. I have a similar situation where I put together a slide deck for a quarterly meeting that we have at work, and I can tell our meeting presenters, just send me your slides. And they are like, thanks for making us look so good. But doing a creative elements into a PowerPoint for me is just a creative outlet. And I just love to use that gift. And some people have that gifting or not. And some people don't have time to do that. And so again, what is something that I enjoy doing may be something somebody doesn't enjoy doing. But yeah, when I can do it for them, then we can just have influence in a way that, yeah, we think is so simple, right? Filling out a form, so easy, but for them, it's huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, so this has been a delight, Faye. I think these are some really wonderful things that a lot of us go through. And I think about our listeners and some of the conversations I've had with folks who listen to this podcast. And I think there are a lot of folks that are intimidated by the big influencers, or by the division leaders in their corporate settings, or by the influencers on social media or wherever that are, have thousands of followers or millions of followers and are making however many hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. But you're talking about an influence that is much more intimate, and is much more approachable, and is much more tangible, and in some ways I'm gonna almost say even more real, because we can see the look on someone's face when we've contributed in a positive way to their day. And these are really lovely ways to think about influence, Faye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Again, I think it goes back to, we get to plant the seeds, and over time, God is going to grow them. And our small efforts somehow are going to weave into his big plan. Really what matters is that we're faithful to that prompt, or to just offer what we have, and then just really trust God to make it grow however he wants it. So, rather than sitting stagnant with that form that needed to be filled out, you can say, hey, I did my small part, and now we can watch it grow.
And watch it grow.
Yeah.
You bet. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
so this is the Even Better podcast. So I gotta ask you our closing question that we so often ask our guests. What's one thing that's making you even better right now, Faye?
Yes. Well, thank you. That's a great question. I love it. And it just, it made me pause to think too, what is making me even better? So last year I had started a gratitude list on my phone. And I have done this in the past, where I have wanted like we had like a family jar of things that we were grateful for, experiences we were grateful for. Let's be honest, I was really the only one that was putting things in there. I also journaled, here are some things I'm grateful for as well. But I wanted one spot. And so I said, you know what? I carry my phone with me wherever I go. And so last year I committed in 2020 to record 500 things that I was grateful for throughout the entire year. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do that again in 2021. And it has been a pleasure for me to go ahead and look back and just really adjust my focus on God's faithfulness, even during difficult times. So COVID 2020 was just a tough year for a lot of people, but just being able to see what I had and the experiences and the feelings that I had, rather than what I didn't have. So my commitment to 2021 is to do 500 plus things. And you know what? I may just put them on, every other day. Maybe it's a couple of times a week. Maybe I'll get in there and my list is long. But it's just a great way too for me to go back and look at, wow, you know what? Things are good. And one thing that we like to do, a tradition that we have on New Year's Day, is that we go back and I read through my gratitude list from 2020 and just pulled out some things, and as a family. And so as a family, we could just really see, oh yeah, I remember that moment. Oh yeah, I remember when we did that during quarantine. And so it's just a great way to adjust our focus on just faithfulness and goodness in the everyday.
You bet.
Yeah.
Oh, Faye, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Well, and
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a joy to hang out with you and to spend this time together. And I know we will spend more time together in the future. And so I appreciate you taking time to be part of this podcast today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity again. It was wonderful. I enjoyed being here.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. On behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.